On the evening of August 14th, 2025, a frantic 911 call rang into Riverside County Dispatch. On the line was 23-year-old Rebecca Haro from Cabazon, California. Her voice was panicked. She told police she had been attacked in the parking lot of a Big Five sporting goods store. And in the chaos, her baby, 7-month-old Emmanuel, had been taken. Within minutes, an Amber Alert was activated. Patrol units swarmed the area, detectives were called in, and the community held its breath. Flyers were printed, social media exploded, and neighbors feared the worst. A tiny infant, vulnerable and defenseless, was missing. At first, it seemed like another tragic kidnapping case, the kind that grips headlines and unites a community in search of answers. But as investigators began to dig deeper, what they uncovered would shake Cabazon, and eventually the entire state of California, to its core. What began as a desperate search for a missing child quickly spiraled into one of the most disturbing and heartbreaking criminal cases California has seen in years. Rebecca Haro told investigators that the nightmare began just outside a Big Five sporting goods store in Cabazon. She claimed that while she was unloading items in the parking lot, a stranger attacked her. In the chaos, she said, baby Emanuel was snatched from his stroller and vanished without a trace. Law enforcement wasted no time. Within hours, search warrants were signed. Patrol cars blocked off surrounding roads while helicopters hovered above. Officers went door to door, questioning witnesses and scanning for any possible lead. Surveillance cameras from nearby businesses were pulled, reviewed frame by frame. Specialized K-9 units swept the area, hoping to pick up Emmanuel's scent. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on this case and others like it. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and together we can demand justice for the victims who can't speak for themselves. The public was told to stay alert. Flyers with Emmanuel's tiny face flooded social media and the streets. Residents joined the search, driven by the thought of an innocent infant out in the world without protection. But almost immediately, cracks began to form in Rebecca's story. Investigators noticed details that didn't add up. Her account of the assault changed with each retelling. Surveillance footage failed to capture the supposed attack. And the timeline she provided raised even more questions. Detectives quietly began to suspect that this was not the work of a stranger in the night, but something far darker, much closer to home. Just days after the desperate search began, the investigation took a shocking turn. Instead of finding a kidnapper, police turned their attention to the very people who had reported Emanuel missing, his parents. On August 22nd, both Rebecca and her husband, 28-year-old Jake Haro, were taken into custody. The community that had rallied around them was stunned. The young couple who had stood in front of cameras, pleading for help, were now accused of being responsible for their own baby's disappearance. Prosecutors charged them with murder and with filing a false police report. Emmanuel's tiny body had not been found, but investigators said the evidence told a grim story, that the 7-month-old was no longer alive. The parents were led into a Riverside County courtroom in shackles, their faces blank, their voices flat as they entered pleas of not guilty. The judge set their bail at $1 million each, a sum designed to keep them behind bars while the investigation continued. For the public, it was a chilling revelation. What had started as a case of a missing child had now become something darker, a suspected murder, and the horrifying possibility that Emmanuel's last moments had come, not at the hands of a stranger, but within his own home. As investigators built their case, one detail became impossible to ignore: the history of Emmanuel's father, 28-year-old Jake Haro. Jake was no stranger to the criminal justice system. In 2018, he was convicted of child cruelty after his 10-month-old daughter was left permanently disabled from abuse. That little girl would never live a normal life again. Many believed prison was the only just outcome. But in a decision that would later haunt Riverside County, Jake avoided a lengthy sentence. Instead, he was given probation and work release, essentially a second chance. 5 years later, in 2023, he faced the courts once again. This time, he pled guilty to willful child cruelty. Once more, the justice system stopped short of locking him away. Jake was sentenced to 6 years of probation, walking free despite a clear pattern of violence and neglect against children. When Emanuel disappeared in 2025, critics immediately pointed back to those decisions. Child advocates, legal experts, and members of the public said Emanuel's fate was sealed the moment Jake was allowed to remain in the community. Even the Riverside District Attorney's Office openly condemned the court's leniency, calling it outrageous, a catastrophic failure that may have cost a baby his life. For many, it was more than a case of individual tragedy. It was evidence of a system that had failed twice before, and now, a third time, with devastating consequences. By mid-September, the Haros were back in court, this time not for another plea, but for what's known as a settlement conference. Inside the Riverside County courtroom, prosecutors and defense attorneys sat across from one another, quietly discussing the unthinkable, a possible plea agreement. The idea sent ripples through the public. Could two parents charged with murdering their own child really strike a deal? And if so, what would that mean? Legal experts explained that in cases like this, especially when a body has not been recovered, prosecutors sometimes consider plea deals to secure cooperation. That could mean the Haros might reveal what really happened to Emanuel, or even disclose where his remains are. Court filings show that both sides are preparing for a critical preliminary hearing scheduled for late October. At that hearing, prosecutors will need to lay out enough evidence to convince a judge there is probable cause to move the case to trial. It will be the first time the public hears the full scope of the state's evidence that so far has remained sealed behind closed doors. For now, the Haros remain behind bars on $1 million bail. Their faces are hidden from public view, but the weight of the case hangs heavy. Each new court date inches closer to what could be a trial, or a plea deal that reveals long-buried truths about the final moments of baby Emanuel's life. For prosecutors, the Emmanuel Haro case carries one of the most difficult burdens in criminal law, pursuing a murder charge without a body. In most homicide cases, a body provides the foundation of evidence. A medical examiner can testify about cause of death, time of death, and whether the injuries were consistent with abuse or neglect. But here, investigators have no such certainty. Emanuel's remains have never been recovered. That absence creates openings for the defense. They can argue that Emanuel may not be dead at all, or suggest that there is no way to prove how, when, or even if he died. Without physical proof, the state must lean heavily on circumstantial evidence. The inconsistencies in Rebecca's story, the father's violent past, and the absence of any credible sign that Emanuel is alive. Legal experts point out that while no body cases are not impossible to win, they demand airtight circumstantial evidence and a compelling narrative that convinces jurors beyond a reasonable doubt. The prosecution will likely emphasize Jake Haro's prior convictions, Rebecca's false kidnapping claim, and whatever forensic or digital evidence they've gathered from the Haro home. The stakes could not be higher. If the jury is left with even a shadow of doubt, both parents could walk free. But if the state succeeds, it will show that even without a body, the truth of Emanuel's disappearance can still be proven, and justice, at least in part, can still be served. Outside the courtroom, the case of baby Emanuel has taken on a life of its own. On social media, his name and picture are everywhere. Posts demanding justice flood timelines, with hashtags calling for answers, accountability, and reform. For many, Emanuel has become a symbol of innocence lost, and of a system that failed to protect him. Anger is especially sharp toward the decisions that allowed Jake Haro to remain free despite a history of abuse. Comment sections are filled with voices demanding harsher penalties for repeat offenders and stricter child protection laws. For them, Emanuel's disappearance is not just a family tragedy, it is a public failure. But social media has also brought confusion. Alongside the facts are unverified rumors, claims of secret confessions, supposed sightings, and speculation about where Emanuel's body might be. Some users accuse Rebecca of masterminding a cover-up, while others argue she may have been trapped in fear under Jake's control. This flood of information, some true, some not, has amplified the pressure on prosecutors and investigators. Every move in court is dissected in real time. Every silence sparks new theories. And while the truth remains locked inside sealed files, one thing is certain: in the court of public opinion, the Haros are already guilty. As the case moves forward, the spotlight shifts to what prosecutors will do next. Without a body, they face an uphill battle. Proving murder in a courtroom without physical remains is rare, but not impossible. They'll need to rely on circumstantial evidence, past abuse records, inconsistent statements, and whatever forensic traces investigators have uncovered. Rumors swirl that plea negotiations are underway. Legal experts suggest prosecutors may consider a deal, one that could force the Haros to reveal what really happened to baby Emmanuel, and where his remains might be. But such deals come with risk. Reduced sentences in exchange for truth could ignite even more public outrage. The next hearing is expected to bring new developments. Will prosecutors announce progress in a plea agreement? Will Rebecca or Jake break under pressure and confess? Or will this case, like so many others, be dragged into years of appeals and delays? For now, Emmanuel's fate remains the most haunting question of all. Without answers, a small community, and now the world, waits in painful silence. As we close tonight's report, we're left with a chilling reality. A baby vanished, a family shattered, and a justice system under fire. The case of Emmanuel Haro is more than a courtroom battle. It's a test of truth, accountability, and whether justice can prevail without the answers everyone is still desperate to find. This story is far from over. I'll continue following every development, every hearing, and every revelation until the full truth is brought to light. Because Emmanuel deserves more than headlines. He deserves justice. If you've been following this heartbreaking case, share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think there will be a plea deal, or will prosecutors push for trial without a body? I'll be covering every update as it happens, so hit that subscribe button and join me as we continue to follow the fight for justice in the Emmanuel Haro case. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop seeking the truth.